Hello and welcome to another motorcycling video. For context, I'm driving from the town of Mittagong southwest to Goulburn. It's distance of about 80 kilometres. I take my Spider to a fellow up there called Old Mate Motorcycles. Sounds like a good name for a motorcycle business. It's having an electrical problem and he was able to help me out with it. So today I'm going to talk about the Motorcycle Action Group, which is a group that a lobby group that acts on behalf of and lobbies for motorcyclists in the United Kingdom. They lobby in the hope that they can get a better deal or a good deal for motorcyclists and motorcycling in general, and they are particularly concerned about getting their membership involved in the upcoming, when I say upcoming, it's the 4th of July, I believe, 2024 UK general election. I'm unable to find any information on how many members the Motorcycle Action Group has, so I'm not sure like how big an organisation it is and how effective its lobbying might be, but as I say, they're a lobby group that lobby on behalf of motorcyclists in the United Kingdom. Now, before we go any further, let me just talk a little bit about UK elections. In the United Kingdom, there are 67 million people. The United Kingdom is made up of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. Voting in the United Kingdom is not compulsory. In other words, you don't have to vote. You do have to be on the electoral register, as they call it, which would be equivalent to our electoral roll, but you do not have to vote. At the last election, which was in 2019, UK government served a 5-year term. The last election in 2019, 67% of the eligible voters turned out to vote. Now, I'm not sure, I don't know what the number out of the 67 million, what the voting population is, but 67% is just over 2/3. And because they have a parliamentary system in the UK similar to ours, people vote for an individual in a constituency, or electorate as we call it, or seat as we call it in Australia. And just like here, the party that gets the most people elected gets to form the government, and the leader of that party becomes the Prime Minister. The current government is a Conservative Party government. It's been in power for, I think, at least 10 years, and is seeking I'm not sure if it's the third or fourth term. It looks like they're going to be defeated and Labor will become the next government, but there are three major parties in the United Kingdom: the Conservatives, the Labor Party and the Liberal Democrats, or Lib Dems as they're called. The other thing that's worth noting about elections in the United Kingdom is that they do not have preferential voting like we do here. No matter how many candidates are standing in your constituency, you only have to go to the polling booth, if you go at all, and mark one box, and you can mark it with a cross. And it's considered a valid vote, and the person who gets 50.1% of the votes, first past the post as they say, is declared the winner or declared elected. And because they don't have to count preferences and distribute them and so on, election results are usually clearer much earlier than they are in Australia. But because they don't have preferential voting, and they did have a referendum on that a few years ago and decided they didn't want it, but because they don't have preferential voting, it makes it hard for independents or people from small parties to get elected, because they can't do that trading of preferences with each other. Now, that's not to say there are no independents or no small party people elected, but by far the biggest majority of people in the House of Commons, which is the lower house of the UK Parliament, are either Labour, Conservatives or Liberal Democrats. Now, with all that in mind, the Motorcycle Action Group is concerned about the future of motorcycling in the UK, and I know I spoke about this in an earlier one, but I'm going to try and expand on that in this and the next couple of videos, and hopefully make some of the things that they are concerned about a bit clearer, but maybe put some alternative views about some aspects of it as well. In the United Kingdom, as I said, there are 67 million people, and according to the data that I could find, 32.2 million registered cars. Now, I'm assuming that the classification cars meets a similar criteria to what we call light passenger vehicles in Australia. That is, the cars that you and I drive, bearing in mind that now 4x4 utes and large SUVs are not considered light passenger vehicles anymore because they can't meet the new vehicle emission standards, so they've been reclassified as light commercial vehicles. But let's assume that the registered cars equates to the types of vehicles that most people in Australia drive. The annual sales of cars in the United Kingdom is about 1.6 million. Now, motorcycles, there are approximately 1.3 million motorcycles registered in the UK. Now, if we were to assume that each of those motorcycles represents one person, then there would be 1.3 million motorcyclists. But that's not always the case, because some people, like myself, might own more than one motorcycle. But let's be generous and say 1.3 million people own a motorcycle in the United Kingdom. And in the last year that I could find sales figures for, 114,371 motorcycles were sold. So about 10%, slightly less than 10% of the fleet were sold in the last year I could find, and that, I believe, was the best year since about 1996. Now, for comparison, the UK, 67 million people, 32 million cars. That's about one car for every two people. For comparison, in Australia, we have 27 million people and 21 million light passenger vehicles. That is the cars that you and I drive. So whilst we don't have one car for every person, the number of cars to the number of people is much higher here than it is in the United Kingdom. Further, for comparison, we have something like 965,000 motorcycles registered in Australia, and in the last year that I could find figures for, 99,030 motorcycles were sold. So again, about 10% of the fleet. So the 1.6 million motorcyclists out of 67 million people is a fairly small figure, and I should imagine there are lots of issues concerning the voting public in the UK at the moment, including some of the issues that we have: interest rates, cost of living, inflation, and so on. And I'm not sure where motorcycling might sit in that list of issues. But for the Motorcycle Action Group, the issue is this. Some years back, I think, as I said in the previous video when I talked about this, I think it was Boris Johnson who made the decision. The UK government decided that as of 2030, they were going to ban the sale of all new combustion engine vehicles in the United Kingdom. And as I said in that video, almost as soon as they made that announcement, they realised it wasn't going to work, and they moved the date to 2035. So as of 2035, all new cars in the United Kingdom will be of some other method of propulsion other than internal combustion. Now, the government's point of view is that all vehicles from that date must have zero emissions at the tailpipe. They're not prepared to countenance hydrogen fuel cells, because hydrogen fuel cell vehicles have emissions. They're water, but they have emissions. They're not prepared to countenance biodiesel or any other fuel like that, because those vehicles have emissions. So effectively, as of 2035, all new vehicles sold in the UK, providing that policy prevails, will have to be electric. And that would mean motorcycles as well as cars. Now, when they changed the decision from 2030 to 2035, they left out a group of vehicles that are called L-class vehicles in the United Kingdom. And the L-class vehicles covers most motorcycles, but specifically in this case, it covers motorcycles from 50cc, so that's little mopeds and scooters, through to 125cc motorcycles. And I believe in some research I found that that represents 5% of bike sales, so not a very big amount. And it's important to note here that motorcycles in total represent 0.4%, so less than 1% of all of the emissions in the UK come from motorcycles. So there appears to be a real problem in the future of motorcycling, but in eliminating motorcycling completely, you would make absolutely or almost no difference, a negligibly measurable difference to emissions as part of the UK's total emissions in any given year. But so what the Motorcycle Action Group believes is going to happen is that as of 2031, that is, in other words, 7 years from now, there will be no new internal combustion engine motorcycles in the range between 50cc and 125cc motorcycles sold in the UK. So think about what that means for a moment. That means motorcycles that are slightly bigger than your lawnmower will no longer be sold, in new ones anyway. You will be able to still, of course, trade and ride existing ones, providing they meet the Ministry of Transport annual inspection and continue to be roadworthy. And if you sell your bike and it's roadworthy and somebody else buys it, they'll be able to continue to ride it until such point as it's no longer roadworthy, or unless the government changes the regulations and says, well, as of this date, all internal combustion engine bikes will be off the road within 5 years or something like that. But if we were to look at the situation now and say there are 1.3 million registered motorcycles, they sell 114,000 a year, then it would take something like 10 years if every motorcycle that was purchased from now on was an electric one and it replaced one internal combustion engine. It would take it something like 10 years to get all those bikes, internal combustion engine bikes, off the road. Now, you might say, well, what's the problem with having electric motorcycles? And I think that we all know there are probably 4 factors, and hopefully I'll have enough time to cover all of those factors in the next few minutes, but if I don't, I'll continue to the next video. There are 4 factors that are influencing the success or otherwise of electric vehicle purchases, be they motorcycles or anything else. But in the case of cars, the first thing is the price. Electric vehicles, as an example, if you were to buy in Australia a Hyundai Kona, you buy an internal combustion engine Hyundai Kona, and you were to buy an electric version of exactly the same vehicle, all the specifications, the interior, everything else is exactly the same. It's only the method of its movement, whether it's internal combustion or electric engine. The difference in price is $20,000. So you're going to need to keep that electric Kona for a very, very, very long time in order to say, well, I've saved the $20,000, extra $20,000. I've saved that in fuel and servicing costs. In fact, you will never save it in fuel and servicing costs. So price is an issue. But to be fair, certainly in Australia, some Chinese manufacturers, that is, companies that are Chinese as opposed to other companies that make their cars in China, some Chinese manufacturers, and I'm not recommending any of them, I'm just mentioning them, MG, Aura, BYD, and a few others who say they're coming to Australia, are producing electric vehicles now that are in what you would consider to be the affordable range, and as a result, they are selling reasonably well. Yes, I know there are other issues, and we'll come to that in a moment, but they are selling reasonably well, and as a result, they're forcing some of the other manufacturers, mainly Tesla that is, to discount their prices in order to maintain market share and get their vehicles off the lot. So price is an issue, but it is being addressed. But when you consider, for example, that if you wanted a family size 7-seater people mover SUV crossover, whatever that is, and you were considering, for example, a Kia EV9, the base model of that in Australia is nearly $100,000. So price is still an issue, and a very big issue. The second issue is, of course, range. In Australia, the Bureau of Statistics says that Australians drive somewhere between 15 and 20,000 kilometres a year. I'm assuming the distances are similar in the United Kingdom. That equates to somewhere between 33 and about 38 kilometres a day, which is simply getting in the car, going to the park and ride, taking the kids to school, going to the gym, doing the shopping and doing it all over again in the afternoon. But where the problem is that people on their holidays, on their long weekend, want to jump in their car and drive until the car is virtually bone dry, stop at a service station, quickly fill it up, fill themselves up, use the bathroom and keep going again. And of course you can't do that with an electric vehicle. Even those that quote their range as being 500 and 600 kilometres are being generous, I think, and even using the WLTP standard, that kind of range is probably more achievable in the city than it is on the open road, just like I'm riding at the moment at 100 or 110 kilometres. You're not going to get the constant recharging of the battery through regenerative braking, so the range that you get will be reduced. And so it's simply not possible to get in your car and drive until the thing's just about dead, charge up and continue. So range is an issue, but it is being addressed, and bigger batteries and better batteries and more efficient batteries are being included, but the problem still isn't solved. The third issue is undoubtedly charging, and that is to make sure that there are sufficient chargers around. So when you need to charge your car, these are things to consider. Number one, is there a charger where I need to charge? Number two, when I get there, have I got the right cables for that particular charger? Number three, have I got the right app on my phone? Because none of them have one of those things that can just read your credit card. And number four, am I the person next in line, or can I just drive in and plug in? If not, you're going to be waiting in line for the 20 minutes that the person in front of you charges up their car. You're going to need 20 minutes. So your recharging time is going to be somewhere between 40 minutes and maybe even longer. And that's all a bit of a nuisance. Now we're rapidly running out of time in this video, so we won't go into the fourth issue in this one because it entails a little bit of discussion, but I'll come back to it in the next part of this video. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the scenery and all the commentary, and I'll talk to you again when I'm preparing part 2 of the Motorcycle Action Group video.